The Democratic Alliance is threatening legal action if the presidency does not publicize the performance appraisals of ministers. Now, this comes after a minister in the Presidency for Monitoring and Evaluation, Maropene Ramokgopa, declined the party's promotion of Access to Information Act. Let's now speak to DA leader John Steenhuisen. John, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Quinn. Great to be with you and with the viewers this evening.
Let's just right there. I mean, as the DA, you're saying you're threatening legal action. Just tell us why. I mean, the presidency did say or sign an agreement on performance appraisals, but what we heard from Vincent Magwenya, the latest, was that, well, they are under no obligation to publicize this information.
Well, Mr. Magwenya is obviously not very familiar with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, specifically Section 92.2, which says that members of the Cabinet are accountable collectively and individually to Parliament for the exercise of their powers and the performance of their functions. It's completely farcical to publish performance agreements on the Presidency's website, but then not to update the public on how members of the executive have performed, or certainly not to table those performance milestones in Parliament, so that they're able to be held accountable. Now, what the presidency has said is that they don't want to embarrass ministers. That's why they don't want to release him. It's got nothing to do with the reasons advanced by the president's spokesperson, is that they know that these ministers have not met these performance targets, and they don't want to embarrass them. It's got nothing to do with accountability and their responsibility to be held accountable by Parliament. And that's why we're saying these performance assessments must be made public. They are performance assessments in terms of the execution of public office, for which they're paid for by the public. And I think the public have a right to know, and certainly Parliament has a right to know, how these ministers have performed and where they haven't performed, so that we too can hold them accountable.
Why then, John, is this important for the DA? Because naturally the first argument would be, well, you're playing politics as the DA. But why is this important that this information is available not only to you, but to the rest of us as the public?
Well, I think it would be very odd if a political party didn't play politics. That's what we exist to do. But this goes beyond the politics. It goes towards the very heart of accountability and transparency, and around holding ministers accountable for their performance. Why did the presidency make these agreements public, but then doesn't want to make public whether the ministers have met those obligations? It seems rather farcical to conduct an exercise for which we will never know the outcome. And bear in mind, these are not CEOs or employees of a company. These are public office bearers who get paid very handsomely by the South African citizens to perform public duties and to execute public responsibilities. And therefore, we believe it's a fundamental matter of accountability and oversight that must make sure that they are accountable for their performance. And it's not good enough to simply hide these performance reports away. It was also then begs the question whether they've actually been done or not. And that's the other question, and one of the reasons why we put in the promotion of access to information request, because there's also no point having performance agreements if you're not then doing the performance assessments that should follow. And this comes hot on the heel of the abject failure by the president to make good on his 2020 promise that all his ministers would undergo lifestyle audits. We know from questions I've put to him in the House in the oral question session that these lifestyle audits have not been done. And it now seems they will be unlikely to be done by the time Parliament rises before the election next year. So what does that talk about accountability and transparency if undertakings made by the President to the public and to Parliament are then just simply ignored and not followed through?
At the risk of playing in the realm of speculation, one of the words that you used and that was said from the president was that they don't want to embarrass the minister. From your vantage point, from your perspective as the DA, why do you think that is the case that, well, they don't want to share the information? So I said, well, at the risk of playing in the realm of speculation.
Well, it's very clear, and I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to realize that clearly in the elements of fighting crime, we're failing. In the elements of dealing with load shedding, we're failing. In the elements of managing public enterprises and our ports, we're failing. in the Minister of Labour's attempts to create jobs. We're failing. And every single one of these government departments is clearly showing that these ministers are not performing. And I think that it is only right that they should be held accountable. It's not a matter of embarrassment or not. It's a matter of accountability. And frankly, if you have not performed or met your targets, then I think you should have something to be embarrassed about, because particularly the exercise of public office or your failure to do your job properly in a public office bearer environment has impacts on people, unemployment, ports that don't work, communities who are ravaged by crime and criminality, houses that aren't built, water and sanitation that's not provided. There are consequences for the people of South Africa when these ministers do not meet the targets that they should be meeting in the execution of their public office.
Would you then say that it's simply because there is a lot of failure from these ministers that the information is not being made available?
I would imagine that is the case, because had the government a good story to tell in this, and had they huge successes where ministers had shot the lights out on these performance agreements, I have no doubt they would be the subject of ANC Twitter accounts and government sharing on social media and other platforms. I think it is precisely because they know that the release of these performance agreements would show how terribly this cabinet has performed in meeting these functions, and how the president has now just been reduced to being a bystander of his government's abject failures to get even the most basic things like water and sanitation and electricity and managing ports right. And I think that it is a poor reflection on the president as well, that he has now led a cabinet where his own team have failed to perform. And as you know, when a team doesn't perform, it's the captain who also takes responsibility for that.
Is the president not, again, John, simply just doing exactly that as the CEO or a captain of the team, where he feels that the team has not been performing well, protecting the team, so that they don't get, again, to the phrase we used and that was used, embarrassed by the public or in the public eye? Is he simply not protecting them? Say that again, John?
Exactly, and that is the problem. He is protecting them. He's protecting them. He's protecting them from accountability. He's protecting them from oversight. And he's protecting them from being held responsible for their failures to perform the most basic functions of their office. And, of course, that is a reflection on him, too.
Now, you said as the DA that you're threatening legal action. Just tell us about that plan. As one, you did try and speak to the Monitoring and Evaluation Minister in the Presidency, Maropene Ramokgopa, and I presume that did not go as well. So what's the plan from the DA's perspective to try and get this information?
Well, obviously, thank you, Quena. Well, obviously what we'll be doing is obviously appealing the decision not to, in terms of the Promotion of Access to Information Act, the performance outcomes of those ministers. And if there's no luck with that, we will obviously be forced to approach the relevant high courts to be able to obtain that information. We believe it is in the public interest, and in this instance, the public interest overrides any form of potential embarrassment that ministers should be feeling for failing to do their duties.
How confident are you of success in this matter, if you take the legal or when you take the legal route?
Well, we've had a great deal of success with accessing the minutes of the Cadre Deployment Committee. As you know, we've been in court on that, and every court has ruled in our favour in that regard. We're waiting now for the Concourt. The ANC have lost their bid to protect and keep secret those Cadre Deployment minutes because, like the minister's performance agreements, they will no doubt reveal very embarrassing information for the ANC. So we have these initiatives like the Promotion of Access to Information Act, precisely so that the public and Parliament can have access to this particular information. There's no need to hide it. If you've performed poorly, fess up, admit that you've performed poorly, and allow Parliament then to exercise oversight in directing what should be done to ensure that you are performing your duties properly. That is the reason we have a Parliament. That is the reason why we have oversight.
John Steenhuisen, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for coming through to speak to us this evening on In Focus. That is DA leader John Steenhuisen.